Hey guys, welcome to SAMtuts. My name is anna-mart, or Sam for short. Welcome to this Blender Beginner series. In this episode, we're going to be adding materials to our meshes. This is going to be the end result of this tutorial. If you haven't seen last week's video, where we did part 1 of this series, a Blender overview and how to model the frying pan and egg that you just saw, go ahead and check that video out first, so that you can follow along. Back to where we left off last time. I know I said that I would show you how to make the sink and the stove, and I will, but stay tuned for the end of the video where I will give you a step-by-step instruction on how to do that. Firstly, we're going to do the materials on these two meshes. Before we do that, there are a few other settings that we have to change. The first thing we want to do is change the render settings. So if you go to the Properties tab and click on this camera icon, then we will see the render engine at the top is Eevee at the moment. That's a really good renderer, but for our realistic purposes, we want to use cycles. So click on Eevee and then select cycles. Now that that's out of the way, we can get back to the meshes. So we want to optimize the shading to make them look as realistic as possible. So to do that, we're going to change it to smooth shading. So we select the frying pan, right click, and select Shade Smooth, which will make it look a lot better. But the edges are still a little bit jagged, so we're going to add a modifier as well, the same one that we've used before, the subdivision surface, or subsurf for short. We also want to make the egg into one object, because at the moment it's two, the egg white and the egg yolk. So we select one, shift select the other one, and press Ctrl J. Now we also want to put smooth shading on this, so right click and select Shade Smooth. But now the egg white looks a little bit weird on the sides, so we want to add the subdivision surface modifier to it as well, and we can leave it as 1. The next thing we want to optimize is the lighting. So at the moment, if you go into render view, which is Z, and then instead of going left for wireframe, you go up into rendered. You can see that the lighting isn't very good, and that is because we have a point lamp. In some cases this is good, but for our tutorial we want to change it to a sun lamp. So select the light and go to the lighting properties, which is this green bulb in the properties tab. And as you can see, point is selected at the moment, and we want to change it to sun. But now it is really bright, because when it was a point lamp it had 1000 watts of power, but as a sun, the strength is also 1000, which is way too much. So we want to change it to 10. It is still very bright, but as we add materials, you will see it'll look a lot better. And then you can just rotate it to wherever you want it. You can also go into top view and change the rotation and the location of it there. I'm going to leave mine as it is. Now we can finally get to the materials. So we're going to start with the frying pan. So select the frying pan and go to the materials properties, which is the one second from the bottom, this sphere with the 4 blocks on it. Then click new, and we want to change the name of this to pan, so that we don't get confused later. Now we want to open the node editor, or as it is now called, the shader editor. To do that, we want to go to the upper right corner, and if you hover your mouse there, it'll change into a cross. If you click and drag to the left, another screen will open. And in this screen, we want to change the editor type. So go to the upper left corner this time, and click on that button, and select, in the first column, select the shader editor. And now you can see these 2 blocks over here. Just click N to remove that sidebar. So now you can see these 2 blocks over here with many different complicated looking settings, but don't worry, I'll explain exactly what you need to do. The amazing thing about this one, the principled shader, is you don't really have to change much of it, and you can basically do any material you want, unless you have something really complicated. So we just want to change the color from white to black, because I want a black frying pan. You can change yours to whatever you wanted, blue or green or pink, but I want mine to be black. So where it says base color, there's a block next to it, that's white at the moment. Select that, and then I'm going to slide down until I get to black. And as you can see, that gives us a nice non-stick pan feel to it. But I don't want the whole pan to be black. I want some parts to be different colors, like the handle and the rim. So to do that, we are going to add another material to the pan. So go to the properties again, and then click this plus icon at the top, which will open up a new material space. Then click new, and now we can change the color to whatever we want. So I want the rim to be gray, and then I'm going to name it rim. But nothing happened. So to change the actual rim to gray but keep the rest of the pan black, we have to go into edit mode. And now we want to select the rim of the pan. So go into face select mode, hover your mouse over one of the faces of the rim, hold in Alt and select, which will select the whole loop. Now when we go to the properties tab, you can see there are 3 new options: assign, select and deselect. If we click assign and go out of edit mode, then you can see the rim has changed to gray. Now we also want to change the handle. So we're going to add another material with a plus, new, and I'm going to name it handle. I'm going to make the color a dark brownish reddish color, just like that. We'll see how it looks once we apply it. Select the pan again, go into edit mode, and now we want to select the handle only. So we're going to front view, then into wireframe mode, Z wireframe. Then we want to go into vertex select and select the handle. Now we click assign again, but make sure you have the right material selected. Go out of wireframe mode into rendered and out of edit mode. Then we can see the handle is a different color. But mine is too red for me, so I'm going to make it a little more brown and a little darker. There we go. And that is the pan. So now I can go on to the egg. So select the egg. Then we want to make another new material. So click on new. And I'm going to call this egg yolk. For this one, we can't leave the principled shader settings as it is, because an egg yolk looks a little bit different from a frying pan. You can just follow along what I do. Since this is only a beginner tutorial, you don't need to understand why we use everything, but just that you can change and make different kinds of materials. So I'm going to change the color first into a nice orangey yellow color. Then I want to go to the specular slider and slide it up all the way to 1, as well as the specular tint. But the roughness I want to slide down to 0, because it has to be very smooth since it is an egg. Then I'm going to slide the sheen as well as the sheen tint up to 1, and the clear coat, which is very important, up to 1 as well. And you can't really see it that well yet because the egg white is also the same color, but once we change the egg white, you will see how good this actually looks. So now we can go into edit mode on the egg, and we want to select the egg white now. But this is a problem because it's the same object now. So what do? All you have to do is click on one of the vertices on the egg white, hover your cursor over it and press L, which will select the whole egg white. Then we want to create a new material by clicking the plus sign, new, and I want to call it egg white. We want to use the same settings for it this time. So first assign it, and go out of edit mode, and then change the specular tint up to 1, roughness down to 0. Sheen and sheen tint up to 1, as well as the clear coat up to 1. And now you can see the egg yolk is looking much better as well. So if we hide the pan with H, and if I go down to around here, you can actually see the reflection of the egg yolk in my egg white, which is exactly what we want, because it has to be very shiny. So let's unhide the pan. And there we are. That's the end of the materials. But as I said, I will show you how to make the sink and the stove, and I'll also show you how to give the sink a metallic material. Let's start with these two objects that I told you we would make now. So this is how it's going to look at the end. Let's start with the stove. Okay, so as I said, it's really simple. The first thing you need to do is just add a plane. So Shift A, Mesh, and Plane. But we want it to be a rectangle. So if you're going to top view with number pad 7, we can scale it up on the x-axis. So SX until about there. Then we can go into edit mode with tab. Everything is already selected. Then we can extrude it down a bit so that it has thickness. So E for extrude and on the z-axis. Just like that. Then we can go out of edit mode and that's it. So for the two stove tops, you just need to make two circles. So Shift A, Mesh, and Circle. But it's hidden underneath the other mesh. But luckily it's already selected. So we can just press G to move it and Z to move it up. Then we can go into edit mode as well with tab, and the same as we did with the pan in the beginning, we can join all of the vertices together by pressing F and creating a new face. Then we can extrude all of them down to make it thicker. So E and Z. There we go. We can go out of edit mode and that's it again. We want two of these, but I haven't showed you how to duplicate objects yet. So let's do that now. If you're going to top view with 7, we can move this into place by pressing G and X and moving it to the left side and scaling it down a bit. Now to duplicate this, all you have to do is select the object you want to duplicate, then press Shift D, and then the new object will follow your cursor. But I want to snap it to the x-axis again, just to move it to the right. So press X and then slide it to where you want it to be. But we don't want them to float, right? So we can select both of them, Shift Select, go into front view with number pad 1 and move them down by GZ. And there we go, that's the stove. Now we can move on to the sink. So I'm going to move this to the right a bit, G, X, and then I'm going to hide it. To make the stove, we have to do something a little bit differently. And it is a bit more tricky, but I'm sure you can do this if you follow along. So we have to start with making a cube. So Shift A, Mesh, and Cube. And I'm going to show you a new function again. If you go into edit mode, and then face select at the upper left corner, and then select the top face, we're going to inset this face by pressing I. If you slide inwards with your cursor, you can see that a new face has appeared and is insetting it into the top face. So I want to make it about that thick, just to make a rim for the sink. And then you have to left click to make it permanent. Then I want to extrude this face downwards so that we have a hollow inside for the sink. So E for extrude and Z to move it down. So that's the basic shape for the sink. Now we just have to make it so that it has smooth edges. Okay, so to do that, we go out of edit mode and add, once again, a subsurf modifier. So we go to add modifier and subdivision surface. Then it'll change the object completely and it'll look really weird. But we'll fix that in a moment. Let's just up the amounts of subdivisions to 2, maybe 3, no, up it to 2, and then go back into edit mode. Now we want to make the sides square again, but with smooth edges. And to do that, we're going to add loop cuts again, as we did with the pan in the beginning. Press Ctrl R, and then hover your mouse over the place you want to add a loop cut. We're going to add one loop cut at every side, and then a few more. So there's going to be a lot of loop cuts, so just look carefully at what I'm doing. So first of all, I'm going to go to this side, add the loop cut, and slide it to the right. Not till it touches the other edge, but just a few millimeters out. Then left click to make it permanent. Ctrl R to add another one, but to the other side. Then to the other remaining sides as well. So Ctrl R, but that way this time. And another one. Okay, so those are the first loop cuts finished. Then we want to add one in the inside of the sink. So Ctrl R, and then hover so that it adds one on the inside and slide it down, as well as the outside. Ctrl R and slide it down. Then we also want to make this rim flatten again. So we are going to add a loop cut, Ctrl R, at the top and slide it in, as well as another one on the outside. And then we can slide that out. If we go out of edit mode by pressing tab, you can see that we have a nice sink shape now. And now you can scale it out to make the shape that you want it to be. So I'm going to scale it on the Z axis, make it a little bit flatter, and also on the X axis, make it a little bit wider. Okay, and there we have it. That's it. So now we can unhide, Alt-H, the rest. I have the pan here as well. And we have the finished sink and stove. So now we have to add materials to them. So firstly, we're going to start with the stove. So go into render view so that you can see all of the materials. If your materials isn't all that visible or it looks dull, just make sure your lighting is right and that your light is strong enough and at the right location and rotation. So everything will look really bright white at the moment, but once we add materials, it'll look better. So let's start with the flat part of the stove. So select that and go to the materials tab and click new. Just like last time, we have another principled shader again. But I'm going to show you a new node setup this time, which is a little bit more simple and it'll make more sense to someone who hasn't had too much to do with all of these options. So to add a different type of shader, press Shift A as we would to make a mesh, and then you will see this toolbar open up. And then we go down to shader, and then we want to click on glossy. So this glossy shader will make it smooth, and we can delete this principled shader by selecting it and clicking delete or X. And then we want to connect this BSDF, so by clicking and dragging on that little green dot and connecting it to the surface by the material output node. We can now change the color to very dark gray. The thing is, we don't want it to just be glossy. We also want it to be a little bit rougher so that it doesn't look like glass. We have to add another shader called the diffuse shader. Before the principled shader came out, this was a very common combination for almost anything. Glossy and diffuse always went together. So Shift A, shader, and diffuse this time, the third from the top. But the problem is there's only one surface output in the material node. So we have to add another shader called a mix shader, which will basically just enable us to use more than one. Shift A, shader, and then mix shader. And you can put it in the middle of that rope, and then you can just add the diffuse to the mix shader, and that'll enable you to use both at the same time. And to make sure we have the same color on both, you can just click and drag on the color box at the glossy shader and drop it into the color box in the diffuse shader. So if we go to the side and look down on it, it just looks gray at the moment. But if you go to the glossy shader and remove all of the roughness, you can see that the stove top is reflected on the surface. That is what we want. But we want to make the diffuse shader a little bit rougher, just so that it's not completely glossy. And then in the mix shader, you will see this other slider, which will basically just determine how much of each node is being used. So at the moment, 50% of each is being used. So you can play around with these three options, the roughness on the diffuse and glossy, as well as the slider in the mix shader. And then you can play around with that to see what looks good to you. I'm going to leave it at about 0.375. And then that is all we need to do for that. Then we go to the stove top, so select that, click new, and we are going to use the same setup for this one. So Shift A, shader, glossy. You can delete the principled shader. Shift A, shader, mix, as well as Shift A, shader, diffuse. Then we can just connect all of these. There we go. And then we can change the colors and the roughness and the factors. So I'm going to make it gray, almost as dark as the stove, but not completely. And then we can just drag and drop the same color on the other one. And then we can play around with the roughness again and make it to your liking. If you go to the side, you can see if you can see the reflection of anything else, and then that'll give you a good indication of how well the shader is working. I think that looks good. And now we want to add the same shader to the other stove top. So just select that stove top, go to the materials tab, and instead of clicking new this time, click on the drop down on the left of it, and then look for the material you just made and select that one. So if you change the settings on one of them, it'll change on both of them. The last thing I want to do is I want to add a smooth shader to both of them. So right click and say shade smooth, which will finish off the job nicely. Now I can move on to the sink. So select it, click new, let's call it metal sink. Then we can change the color. I'm going to change it to a gray, light grayish color. And the only two sliders you have to change this time is the metallic, which will slide all the way up to 1, and the roughness, which will slide down a bit to around 0.314. And then you can play around with the color until it looks like the type of sink that you want. I'm going for a stainless steel look, so I don't want it to be too dark. Except for the sink itself, we also want to add a tap. So to do that, we can go out of rendered view, so Z, solid, and then we will start by making the tap. Just say Shift A, mesh, and cylinder this time. For now, we can just hide the sink so that it's not in the way. So select the sink and press H. Now we want to scale it down on every axis except the Z axis. To do that, we press S to scale it, and then Shift Z, so then it will scale only on the Y and the X axes. Then we can go into front view. Then I want to move it up, G, Z, until it meets that red line, which is the X axis. And I also want to scale it down on the Z axis, so that it's a bit shorter. But we also want that rounded shape at the top for the zap. So we're going to edit mode, and then into face select mode, and select the top rounded face of the cylinder. We can go back into front view, and now what we want to do is we want to extrude the top, then rotate it by pressing R, and then moving it into the position we want it a little bit to the left. Then we will do the same thing over and over again until we get a nice rounded shape. So extrude, rotate, and move. So I'm just going to speed mine up a little because it's going to take a while of the same thing over and over. When you get to the last one, you can just say SZ0 to make sure it's nice and straight on the Z axis. Once you're done, just press Tab to go out of edit mode. Then we want to smooth it out by adding a subsurf modifier. So go to the modifiers tab, add modifier, and then subdivision surface. And I want to make 2 subdivisions in the viewport. It looks really weird now because the 2 ends are not as we would expect the tab to look. So go into front view and then edit mode. And what we want to do now is we want to make sure we're in edge select mode, and then select the bottom edge by pressing Alt and then selecting it. And now we're going to do a new command. So right click on your mouse for this menu to come up, and then click on edge crease, and then slide your mouse out until it is completely flat again. Now go to the other end and do the same thing. So Alt select the rim, right click, edge crease, and slide out until it's completely flat. If you go out of edit mode, you can see it looks like a tap. Now we can just right click and select shade smooth, and that's the end. So now I can unhide the sink, so Alt H, and then we want to go into top view and rotate the tap 90 degrees, so R 90. And if you see it goes the wrong way, just right click to cancel the movement and press R negative 90. Then we can go into side view and move it into position. I don't know about you guys, but here in South Africa, many homes have a smaller tap next to the bigger one for filtered water. So I'm going to add one of those. So select it and Shift D to duplicate it, and right click to cancel the movement. Then you can G and X to move it to the side, and then you can scale it down. and then move it down as well. And that's the end of the modeling. Now I can add materials to the taps as well. I want to use the same material as the sink. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select them, or one at a time. Go to materials, click on the drop down, and select my metal sink material, and do the same with the other one. If you go into render view now, you can see that it looks the same. And that's the end of the tutorial, guys. Thank you so much for following along, and I hope you enjoyed this. And that's the end of part 2. Next week, we'll be doing something completely different but really fun, rigging. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. I'll see you next week Thursday.